Good morning, everyone. It is early, I think. Oh, it's 7 o'clock. And I wanted to get this posted so you can watch it before you take your quiz because that's going to be really important. Still can't figure out how this goes. Okay, so we are on page 8, and we're going to end the Civil War this morning and then move a little bit into Reconstruction. And I'm going to try to keep this short just so you don't have as much to watch. And then you're going to have 2 quizzes to take, I think. Your vocab quiz and your reading quiz. So we were on page 8. Lincoln had just been elected to office a second time, and that really kind of puts a damper on the South, because the South had really anticipated Lincoln losing and McClellan winning and somehow coming to some kind of peace agreement to end the war. And so that really, really put a big weight on the South that this is not the way the war is going to end. We're going to have to change what we're doing. And by that time, it's really too late for them. I think we ended yesterday with that very important line from Lincoln's second inaugural address, which kind of foreshadowed what he anticipated Reconstruction being. And Reconstruction being literally reconstructing the Union after the Civil War. And it's in the middle of that page: with malice toward none, with charity to all. And really what Lincoln wanted was to get the country back together as quickly as possible and get back to the business of the United States of America. That's not going to happen. The end of the war, Grant's Virginia campaign, again, is going to bring that whole idea of total war. We've had Sherman's march to the sea. He hit Savannah. Now he's back moving up through South Carolina into North Carolina. And then Grant is in Virginia taking on Lee and that last holdout of the Army of Northern Virginia. Grant's strategy is to attack rebel armies simultaneously. And that had not been done. You know, you would have thought at some point someone would have said, we got this giant army. Why don't we just attack everybody at once? Because most of the time, when we really start specifically looking at battles, most of the time the Confederates pull it out at the end because some other general or some other captain major brings their forces from an entirely different spot that hadn't been attacked to save the day. So that is something that, really should, my hair again, really should have been thought about, but they never tried it. So Grant's going to do that. The casualty is going to result in that battle strategy is going to result in a lot of casualties. 50,000 men are going to be marked as casualties. So we have Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Siege of Petersburg. And again, the bottom of that page, the Siege of Petersburg, contained all railroads that served Lee's army. They can't get any supplies. Lee rushed in time to defend Petersburg, but then Grant lays siege to the city. So nothing is moving in or out of the city at all. And again, with Richmond, it's going to fall on the 2nd of April. They're going to, again, lay into Richmond, and eventually that brings about on page 9, Lee's surrender to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th. Lee surrenders the Army of Northern Virginia. And just please make sure you see that. The war in Virginia is over. We're still going to have to clean up for the next couple of months other hot spots throughout the South. The remaining Confederate armies are going to surrender within weeks. I mean, it does happen fairly quickly, but I do want you to understand that April 9th does not end the Civil War. It goes on for a few more weeks in many other states. Terms of surrender were very generous. The 30,000 captured Confederates were paroled to go home as long as they vowed to never take up arms. The Confederates were allowed to keep their own horses. Officers could keep their sidearms. Keeping their sidearms, that's a fairly normal surrender kind of thing. It's a long-held protocol. It happens even in World War II when the Germans begin surrendering to both the British and the French and the U.S. The officers are allowed to keep their sidearms. And Grant is saying the war's over. These people are now our countrymen. These are now members of our country. So we can't, and that is going to be the difficulty when we get to Reconstruction, because this isn't, I mean, it's an enemy, but it's not an enemy, right? Like, how are we going to put this all back together, recognizing that we all have to come together to make a country, but also recognizing there is consequences for what the South did. And that is going to be the trouble in the aftermath of the Civil War and Reconstruction. Lincoln is going to be assassinated on April 14th. And again, you are never asked anything about Lincoln's assassination, but I do want to stop and pause and tell a little bit about Lincoln's assassination that many people, even history buffs, don't understand quite the complexity of that assassination. So John Wilkes Booth is from Maryland. He was from a very, very famous acting family. His brother was very famous, world-renowned, known everywhere around the world who his brother was. His brother's in New York. He's going to create in the next 10 years this billion-dollar billionaires club, of which he is a part of and tries to live down, obviously, his brother. John doesn't live up to those aspirations. He is very, very handsome, but he's just not the same actor as his dad and his brother. He is in Maryland, and he is staying in a boarding house owned by Mary Surratt, and they begin plotting and planning to bring Lincoln down. They feel like if Lincoln was gone, the Union would make treaties or would come to the peace table with the Confederate, and the war would be over, and the South would get to keep all their slaves. That's essentially what they thought. They tried to kidnap Lincoln a couple times, and that didn't work. Mary Surratt had taken weapons out to a farm out in Maryland. She was an active participant. And essentially what they came down to, what happens on April 14th, is not just one assassination. Their plan was essentially this. Lincoln was supposed to go to Ford Theater with General Grant. General Grant's wife did not like Mary Todd Lincoln. There was a whole lot of people that didn't like Mary Todd Lincoln. And so Grant's wife said, I'm not going to the theater with that lady. You need to tell him something. So Grant made up an excuse. I think he said he was going to visit his children. I don't know what he said. Going to visit his kids or whatever. Somebody was sick. And so they did not have a partner or a couple for the theater at Ford's Theater to see our American cousin. And eventually ended up finding the daughter of a senator of New York. Her name was Clara, and her fiance, Henry Rathburn. So they were the unfortunate ones that were in the theater box watching the play when Booth stepped in. Booth's plan was to kill both Lincoln and Grant. That was the plan. While that was happening, two of the other conspirators with Booth were supposed to be killing Vice President Johnson at his home, and also Secretary of State Edward Stewart, who was at his home recovering from a horrific carriage accident. So that was the plan. The plan was at the designated time, all four of these people were going to be assassinated. And that's the part that most people don't know, that this wasn't just to kill Lincoln. It was to take out everybody in the government to bring about chaos so that the Confederate States could live on. Obviously, it didn't happen that way. The only one, unfortunately, that was killed was Lincoln. Seward was at home convalescing from this very critical injury. I think he would have normally, what we call now, had a cracked skull and a concussion. The person that was going to kill him was pretending to be someone bringing medication. And so he came in. He did not look like anyone bringing medication because he's like 7 feet tall, very menacing kind of figure. Gets past his son, goes up into Secretary of State Seward's bed chambers, stabs him a gazillion times, stabs him so much in his face that he almost dislocated his jaw or removed his jaw. And then they all take off running. So at the end, we have Booth and I cannot remember his last name. His first name is George, running and leaving. They are just able to get outside of Washington, D.C. before curfew, and then they start running into Virginia, where they get a whole bunch of mixed communications. They were supposed to have John boats to move them about, and they kind of get lost in the Dismal Swamp, which is really the name of that, and it is a dismal swamp, and end up being helped and aided by a doctor whose name was Mudd, Dr. Mudd. Hence, those of you that are familiar with old sayings, when people say your name is Mudd, it comes from that doctor who helped fix the ankle of John Wilkes Booth. They end up getting holed up in an old tobacco barn and just shot to pieces by the federal troops that are hunting them down. So they both die. But the conspirators, Mary Surratt and all of those people that helped, they will all be convicted and hung. And Mary Stuart will be, I believe, the first female that the United States government executes, and she will be hung at after her trial. She tries to say the whole time, I just lived there, but no, she was part of it. She's a big part of it. So now we have that done, and what that does is the opposite effect of what John Wilkes Booth did or wanted to happen. What it does, and instead of having the Union in disarray and wanting to just get rid of the war because they're in chaos, it actually, as on page 9, the assassination increased the bitterness, and it is going to increase tremendously because of the assassination of Lincoln. Lincoln, again, even in his presidency, was a well-loved president. His funeral train begins in Washington, D.C. It goes through Indianapolis. There's a big sign in and around the courthouse in Indianapolis about the Lincoln funeral train. People just standing on the sides of the train tracks in mourning, in deep, deep mourning for Lincoln. And it proved to be, for the South, a horrible event that changes the way the South is going to negotiate with the losers, the Confederacy. The other thing that's going to happen that will drastically change the way the North interacts with the South, the losers, is what they see when they get down there at prisoner of war camps, and especially in Andersonville. North treated their prisoners better than the South, mostly because they had more resources. They were treated like prisoners. They got fed 3 times a day. They were locked up. They got exercise. They could write home. The prisoners in the South could not, because they could barely feed their own people. And so these men were like walking skeletons. If you showed a picture of a prisoner of war in in Anderson, they look worse or the same as pictures of what we've seen of men in the Holocaust. It's horrific. It's awful. It's horrible. The pictures are just horrific. 13,000 men are going to die in those camps. And when that is revealed, again, this hatred and animosity toward the South and what they did with those prisoners. And the South is going to say, well, we couldn't feed them. And the North is going to say, then you should have let them go. You should have returned them. They were in no condition to fight in the way that you were returning them. They were just dying. So those two things, when we move into Reconstruction, are really going to be horrible events that remain in the front part of the North's mind as they deal with what is going to be traitors, treasonous, losers who wanted to have slavery. And that's how these people in the North are going to view that. So the top of page 10, results. 620,000 soldiers dead. That's 2% of our population. That is a tremendous number. And especially when we think about that 300 or 620,000 are the important population of males. That's males between the ages, now we have to go down to 15 because of the South, 15 to about 40. That is your prime baby makers. It's the entrepreneurs. It's the working backs of America. And it is difficult, especially for the South, to recover from that. Positive is that slavery will be abolished by the 13th Amendment. Cost of the war, again, is going to be tremendous. Nullification and secession is going to die with that Confederacy. It does not come up anymore. The ideal of a union and nation will triumph. The war economy is going to lay the foundation for the second industrial revolution. And that second industrial revolution is going to explode and bring the United States of America finally onto that global playing field with the rest of Europe. And then that Monroe Doctrine thing that we talked about that really didn't have much of an impact, guess what? It will now, because the United States now is an economic superpower. So we're going to take a pause before we start with Reconstruction. And I am adding, instead of having you email me, I'm going to put these little clips in the quiz. So first thing is a test, or the first quiz question that you will know only because you watched this video. And if you tell your friends, sad, shame on you. It's going to be a very random test question that you could only answer if you watch this. And the answer is, what is Mrs. Norris's favorite Little Debbie's? Fancy cakes. I love these things so much. They are my favorite. The only place in town I can get them is Baszler's. Love these fancy cakes. That's question number 1 that you will get right because you watched this video. All right, so part number 2, we're at 17 minutes. I'm not going to go much longer, is Reconstruction. We're just going to look at Reconstruction as an overview. Lincoln's 10% plan in 1865, the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery, looking at all these different ways to put the United States back together again, because it is difficult. How are we going to do this? It is, again, we don't have a book for dummies on how to put your country back together. It's difficult. It's hard. And it is going to be very challenging. And in the end, sadly, the government just gives up and lets the South go back and do whatever they want. And that's the sad part of the Civil War. It kind of, sort of, is like those of you in AP Euro, remember when we talked about the French Revolution and I drew that sideways kind of big, long, backwards C or upside down or sideways U, that we started with King Louis and we did all this stuff and we ended up back with Napoleon. It's kind of going to be the same, except it's not slavery. It's Jim Crow, it's sharecropping, and it's black coats that are still going to remain and keep African Americans in the South in a place where they can achieve or succeed or really be part of what America provides. So again, what's Reconstruction? Again, it is an attempt to achieve national reunification and reconciliation after the Civil War to improve the status of former slaves. You need to know that definition. That's really important. The reality, it is enormously difficult. Politics, again, is going to get in the way. The North prevailed in the Civil War. The South prevailed after the war. I would put a giant box. The North wins the war. The South is going to win after the war, and they're going to win huge. I mean, it's not even a contest. So the 4 main questions of Reconstruction that we need to answer and we need to fix as a government is, how do we rebuild the South? What would be the condition of African Americans? How would the South be reintegrated into the Union? Do they just get to come back in? What do they do? And who would control the process? The Southern states? That's what the South wants. The president? That's what the president wants, or Congress. That's what Congress wants. And so we have all of these things with really no guidelines, no constitutionality. Like there's nothing that says how any of this, Congress works. Their roadmap is the Constitution, and it tells them what they can and can't do. There is nothing in the Constitution about this. So it is really open range for a whole lot of stuff to go on. Then our next part is, what are we going to do with the Confederacy? More importantly, what are we going to do with Jeff Davis? What is he? Because he is an American, but he also led an insurrection against the United States. He's also has committed treason against the United States. He's also a leader that represents that could potentially reinvigorate another uprising. So what are we going to do with this guy? First, they have to find him, because he is all over the place. And eventually they will find him, much to his demise, dressed up like a woman trying to escape. And that does not go down well. Lots of very mean, snippety pictures of Jeff Davis escaping in women's clothing. So the 13th Amendment is most important that we need to discuss. Slavery is abolished. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Congress is getting much better at writing amendments. Now they're giving rules like, not only do we give the amendment, but who gets to enforce it. And Congress gets to enforce and have the power to act that. So we're just going to finish up on page 2, rebuilding the South, and what the South looks like and what we need to do. So Richmond, Charleston, and Atlanta destroyed. There is nothing left in those places. Both Lee and Sherman and every other Union general that went through those places burned them to the ground, lit a match, let it burn. Economically, the South lay in ruins. Banks ruined by runaway inflation. The few factories that they did have, again, destroyed. Transportation system, devastated. Sherman used every single slave following his, or freed slave following his troops to tear up railroads. They tore up every single railroad. There's not a track of rail left anywhere really in the South. Agriculture, cotton fields full of weeds. There is nothing growing in those fields. Livestock gone. They confiscated those. Any cows, pigs, chickens they saw, they took. Agriculture output did not return until 1870, and that 10 years. It takes 10 years for that to happen. The planter aristocracy, devastated. What they based their wealth on, slaves, is now gone. So they have no capital, no basis of wealth. Their beautiful mansions are destroyed, and now they are what's called cash poor, land rich. Except the problem is going to be they have to pay taxes on that land, and that's going to be where the dilemma of the South will come into play. So I've come to the end. Last question on the quiz that you will only get to know if you've watched this video is Mrs. Norris is proudly wearing one of her most favorite team jersey, because they play football tonight, are better known in the United States as soccer, and that's Manchester United. This is my badge, Manchester United. So the quiz is going to say, what jersey or what team jersey is Mrs. Norris supporting today with her jersey? Manchester United. And I hope they win, because then it'll put us back at the top of the table, because I love football, European football. Okay. So I'm done. I'm getting a little bit crazy loopy sitting here talking to myself in an empty room. If you have any questions, please let me know. The quizzes are on lockdown, but I don't have an access code, so you do have to be in the lockdown to take it. So have a great Wednesday. Let me know if you have any issues. Remember, Mrs. Norris's favorite little Debbie cakes are fancy cakes, and Mrs. Norris is wearing a jersey today to support Manchester United. All right. Have a great day. Bye.